Good evening, everyone. My name is Angela Columbus, and I'm an investigative reporter with Spotlight PA. And together with my colleague, Min Xian, we'll be moderating tonight's live event. Thank you for spending your Thursday evening with us, and we're looking forward to hearing your questions and hopefully getting you some answers. For those of you who are new to our programming, Spotlight PA is an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit newsroom producing investigative and public service journalism about the state government and urgent statewide issues. We can't do any of this work without you, our members, and those of you who support us. And you can learn more about us on our website, spotlightpa.org. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. Tonight's event will be recorded and it will be posted on our website tomorrow for those who could not be here tonight. And thank you to everybody who submitted a question in advance. If you would like to submit a question during the event, you can do so in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. And Min and I will try to get to as many of those questions as possible towards the end of our program. I'm excited to announce our panelists, but very quickly before I do, Min and I wanted to very briefly talk about why we decided to tackle this story. As you know, DuBois's former city manager, Herm Suplizio, was charged last year, first by state prosecutors and then later by federal prosecutors, with stealing hundreds of thousands in public and nonprofit dollars.
That's right. And we wanted to know, how could allegations this big happen in a small city without anyone noticing? What controls and oversight could have caught this? Were those in place? And what can residents do to demand more accountability? And where does a city like DuBois, which is still very much under scrutiny by federal prosecutors, go from here? So here to help us answer these questions and more this evening are Leanne Davis, Rachel Heisler, and Jennifer Jackson. We'll ask them to introduce themselves now. Leanne?
Hi, my name's Leanne Davis. I'm with the City of Pittsburgh's Ethics Hearing Board. Is that good? Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name's Rachel Heisler. I'm the city controller in Pittsburgh. I have a background in sustainable public finance and also worked on Capitol Hill.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Jackson. I am a business owner in DuBois, born and raised, and I am now a councilwoman on the City Council of DuBois.
Well, thank you for joining us. Let's get started. I want to kick off our conversation with you, Leanne. Could you talk generally about some of the guiding principles for public and other officials when it comes to ethics and good practices in ethics?
Okay. Well, I apologize in advance if my feed is a little spotty here. Can you hear me okay? Am I cutting out?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I would just say a few things about ethics. And I have a couple calls to action, but I heard, Min, you said that that's one of the questions that maybe you'll be asking about how can we prevent this in the future? What more can we do? But just basically, when we think about governmental ethics, we generally think about conflicts of interest, where the public interest of the public good of our positions, our government, and how those interests of the public intersect with our own private interests. And when those two interests conflict, there are ways to manage those conflicts or ideally avoid them. So I would talk about that. Basically, we want to make sure that we aren't using our public resources for our private gain, for personal use, for political use. As we can see here, it can be a problem. Yeah.
Right. And I guess I'm going to ask one quick follow-up there. When we're talking about sort of personal versus, your professional duties, what does the law generally require of public officials or elected officials in that regard? How to keep those two things separate?
Yeah, absolutely. So the guiding law for most of that would have been applicable here in DuBois is the State Ethics Act. And the way they define a conflict of interest is the use of the authority of your office. And that authority of your office is an extremely broad term. It's not just your delineated job duties that are in your job description, it's everything that's contingent with holding that office. And using that authority to your own private pecuniary gain. So it's anything that could have a financial impact that can be calculated, which is pretty much everything. And when that gain goes to yourself, to your family members, or to a business that's associated with you or your family. So that's how the state defines it, but there's also some local cities like Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and some other cities in Pennsylvania that go beyond that.
And I'll ask Rachel this question, kind of similar to what we have asked Leanne in terms of ethics, but for fiscal accountability. So what are some best practices when it comes to fiscal accountability for especially public officials, elected officials, and what types of checks and balances do state law require to be in place?
What I would recommend first and foremost, and I would say this to Councilperson Jackson, what I would do immediately is adopt GASB accounting standards, which is the Governmental Accounting Standards Board accounting standards, and then release an annual audited financial statement. So most large cities, I think the total is 30,000 municipalities and states across the United States, release annual audited financial statements. It's now the GASB GFOA title is ACFR, Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. So if anybody in there across the state or across the Commonwealth or across the country wants to look up if their municipality does it, if you Google comprehensive annual financial report or annual comprehensive financial report and the name of your municipality, that should be online if you publish, if one is made every year. And that would expose any wrongdoing and would make things much more detectable to the public and to other folks who are working in government. And then the other thing I would say is segregation of duties. So in the city of Pittsburgh, we have 3 branches of government. The mayor is the executive, the legislative branch is city council, and that check and balance on the rest of city government is an independently elected city controller, which is the position I hold. So money comes in through one branch of government and goes out through the other branch of government. In Pittsburgh, and as the title would say, the treasurer falls under the direction of the mayor, and the controller is the one who literally cuts the check and spends the money. So when money comes into the city, it just doesn't go to one place and one person has access to it. And in fact, we actually have on all bank statement or all actual bank accounts, we have upwards of 5 or 6 signers on all accounts. There is no bank account associated with the city of Pittsburgh that has 1 signer or 2 signers. And it's always this treasurer and the controller at a minimum. Usually you'll have someone from the Office of Management and Budget. Usually you'll have the mayor themselves is signing it. The controller, the deputy controller are on every single bank account. So, and you need multiple people involved from each branch if you want to move money of any kind. And I actually would wonder and propose to state legislators if it is currently permissible to have a municipal bank account only have, I think, 2 signers and not have a check and balance on that, but that could probably be addressed through state government, making sure that municipal governments themselves are not opening bank accounts that allow that to happen. And from what I understand from DuBois, there was no check and balance on many bank accounts. And I think that if we can take action to prevent that everywhere, that's a good step. So those would be my recommendations, is to adopt GASB accounting standards and to produce that annual report, and then also to make changes within the structure of government to prevent issues like what happened in DuBois, prevent that from happening elsewhere.
And Jennifer, as someone who followed local government in DuBois very closely, even before coming into office in January, you now have kind of two different perspectives. Can you speak to whether you feel like any of those best practices were in place, how well or not were they working in DuBois?
Unfortunately, DuBois was like the perfect storm. We had no checks and balances, and truly from the top down, there was people in places that were able to just push things through that were never caught. And even now, we don't have job duties, we don't have employee handbooks. We don't have anything like that in the city, and it's even still, we're finding out multiple things almost weekly of things that need changed and rectified. So it truly was the perfect storm for us here, that we had none of that.
Can I just ask one quick follow-up question to that, Jennifer?
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
what kind of work is going on now in terms of trying to get some of those things in place? It's just sort of shocking to me to hear that there's no like handbook or even, general sort of best practices type of document that employees have and city council members have.
So we truly, one of the things we kicked off the year with was training for council members, for the new 3 council members. So it was training us and then contacting the municipal league to get their input. And we want them to come to the city of DuBois and tell us how things need to be done. One thing that's always said to us now at meetings is, well, this is the way we've always done it. Well, that doesn't mean it's right, and we're finding that out. So it's getting a lot of outside input as to best practices. Our solicitor, interim solicitor, has been a great help in getting us information as to what we need to do, new practices, policies, and procedures. We are working on that, and getting, job duties. There's so much to start out with. It's overwhelming.
Okay. I see that there is a question from Linda about wanting a very, very brief synopsis of what happened in DuBois. I can give that in under 30 seconds, hopefully, and then we can go from there. But basically, the city manager in DuBois, a very well-known local son of DuBois, Herm Suplizio, was charged last year first by the state and later by federal investigators, basically with theft, that he stole thousands. In the beginning, it was almost 600,000. That number actually became smaller as time went on, of dollars from the city of DuBois, and also from a nonprofit where he was the executive director, and also from it's called Community Days, which Jennifer could probably talk about more. It is basically a sort of this loosely created committee that raises money for an annual summer festival in DuBois. The federal prosecutors took over the case late last year, and then the state charges were dropped. And that is where we are at the moment. I hope that helps. So going back to what you were talking about, Jennifer, I wonder, one of the takeaways that we got from our reporting was that DuBois is a rare form of city government. It's like an optional city manager form that gives the city manager a lot of power. Um, I'm wondering, if that may have played a role in sort of creating a situation that is ripe for potential abuse. And can you talk a little bit about the separation of powers under the city government structure? Who's responsible for what and how that works?
So truly, again, DuBois was the perfect storm because our council members were also, I don't want to say handpicked, but some of them were. You have to understand our background. We have a large fire department, and you have to really have an in with the fire department to get elected in the city of DuBois. And unfortunately, our manager was also past, fire chief of the fire department. So he could kind of pick who he wanted in there. A lot of them were firemen. So it was always a loose form of government. There was really no checks and balances where the elected officials, the council, were mostly just trusting him to do his job, where the manager should have some good managerial experience, and he didn't have that. He didn't really have the financial background, anything. So everything was just pretty loose. And the solicitor at the time was also a close friend of his and played a big part of how this all worked.
I will add that in our reporting, we found that there are only 2 cities in Pennsylvania that have opted for this optional council manager form, DuBois being one of them, and the other one is Altoona. And one thing that really stood out, at least to me, was finding out that the city manager is essentially the chief administrator for the entire city. He is both a bridge and could at times act as a firewall between city council and department. So to Rachel and Leanne, I'm interested to hear if you see this kind of rare form of government necessarily inherently raise any red flags, either from the standpoint of ethical conduct or fiscal accountability. Rachel, let's start with you. This reminded me of what you were talking about in terms of separation of duties.
Yes. I mean, in our office is responsible for paying the city of Pittsburgh's bills. We don't have people voucher checks to be paid and then have them print the checks. I mean, even those smaller duties within the city of Pittsburgh are broken down so that there is no, we have effectively made an effort to eliminate the opportunity for misconduct. I do believe the controller's office has close to 60 employees. I believe that most people, most of the time, do want to do the right thing and are doing the right thing. I have complete confidence in the people that work in our office. But you do need to have that check and balance, and you do need to eliminate, because you need to eliminate the opportunity that someone could have to commit fraud. I think it's prudent. People expect that. Taxpayers expect that, residents expect that. And, being proactive about segregating those duties and making sure that we have eliminated any even inkling of wrongdoing or removing the opportunity to do so is of the utmost importance, because, people need to have faith in their government, and they need to make sure that, we have an obligation to make sure that they have trust in the public. And, I can't overstate how important that is. And that's what I would recommend, structurally, is just making sure that things are separated so that they're, think about it mechanically. There are 2 signers on every check, and they come from different departments that they don't know each other, and they're not coordinating. Because I do think that that's the only way that you prevent that from happening again, whether it's in DuBois, Altoona, or anywhere else.
And Leanne, what are your thoughts?
I would just add, there's that expression, sunshine is the best disinfectant, right? We need to have transparency. That's how you can kind of bring to light some of these issues. And so, you know, one of my calls to action before would be to support independent journalists like yourself. You know, without your great work and investigation, would this have come to light? So I think, you know, Rachel can do great work, I can do great work, but if people don't know what's going on, you know, the public need to know what's going on in their government. I would just add that. A lot of the governmental ethics offices across the country are also the place where like FOIA requests happen, freedom of information. Not in
Yeah,
Pittsburgh, but other places, yeah.
it's
Ma-
definitely a collective effort.
The other thing Leanne said this, and our office has taken a my predecessor, who I also worked for, City Controller Michael Land, made great strides in getting everything online. So, you know, if you want to look, we have Fiscal Focus and Open Book. You can look at every city contract that's executed on Open Book. Fiscal Focus has every dollar that's spent and where it's gone. Because it is reflective of our own internal financial software, it sometimes can be a little wonky, but it is all online. You know, you can see every dollar that goes out. And in addition, the city, and some of those tools are cumbersome for smaller governments, but one thing that you could do quite easily in any municipality is to print monthly revenue and expenditure reports. And the city of Pittsburgh does that too. And those are available on the controller's office website. And, you know, just making that stuff available, you know, eliminates a lot of opportunity for fraud because anybody can look at it. And again, I appreciate that they are pretty wonky documents and websites, but one, if anybody ever wants to walk through one of those websites with our office, please feel free to reach out. But, you know, getting that online and available to the public without having to even file a right to know or a FOIA request, I think is a huge step in the right direction.
Absolutely. And I would encourage everyone in our audience tonight to try to understand and get familiar with the state's open records law. It's called a right to know law. You can go to spotlightpa.org and find a lot of the work that we have done to try to help people to understand how they can utilize it as well. It's a very important tool in our reporting. I will say that for sure. I'd like to talk for a minute about local officials and outside employment and whether there should be some guidelines around that, especially understanding that for a lot of the elected official, it's a part-time job for them, as we know from Jennifer's case. And in Mr. Suplizio's case, he wore several different hats, including running the local United Way, which is a nonprofit, and accepted donations on behalf of the city, and running the annual festival in the city called Community Days, which also have financial ties with the city as well. That is exactly why prosecutors allege he took advantage of those positions to move money in and out of various different bank accounts, which they believe formed the basis for his alleged theft. So I want to ask you this, Jennifer, did anyone in the city, to your knowledge, ever raised red flags about his multiple different positions outside working in addition to his position as city manager?
Oh, yes. The United Way was always a big conflict with Herm, wondering why he was getting paid from United Way, and the secretary from United Way was also the secretary at the city building. It was just, there was always, and the fire department, you have to tie that in also, because the fire department ran community days, and he was also on the board for, you know, community days and the fire department. It was all just so convoluted, and I think that's the way it was meant to be. You couldn't understand where money was going, why donations were being made to United Way, but then they were going to the city park. It was just all such a mishmash of what people's jobs were. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do now, is have people just one job title, one job. You can't conflict being on another committee. That was another thing. The committees were all headed by somebody in the city building also, or it was all of the friends. So when I say it was a perfect storm in DuBois, it truly was, because they were on the committees, and we're trying to sort through that now also. As we get people off of committees and on new committees, what are their ties? Can they be transparent? That's one of our biggest things right now, is what are their ties, to the community? Are they doing this for the betterment of the community or themselves?
That actually, raises a really important question, in which, Rachel, hopefully you can answer for us. I'm sort of listening to Jennifer speak. I'm wondering, what kind of financial disclosure is required of public officials, like the basic bottom line, and are there places where, or like cities where people go beyond that, beyond what the basic fundamental bar is for public disclosure?
I'll turn it over to Leanne, but in Pittsburgh, we file so we have to I believe all municipal employees across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania have to file the SOFI, which is the Statement of Financial Interest. And I think that lists any other employment. I actually had a part-time job 2 years ago because my dog died, but and that was listed. I worked at LL Bean for 4 months. So the thing I think that's particularly odd about the situation in DuBois is that's a lot of hours in a week to be working full-time jobs. But Pittsburgh has also the disclosure of DOI, the disclosure of interest form that we require all city elected officials. So everybody on city council to fill out, the mayor and the controller, and those are also listed online, and it lists property, debt that you owe, so your mortgage, I'm trying to think, boards that you're involved with. But Leanne should probably handle more of the ethics disclosures.
Yeah, and Leanne, I wanted to also ask you too, like, in your opinion, right, is there a difference between what, a larger city, say like Pittsburgh, should be filing in terms of disclosures versus, a smaller city like DuBois, where there aren't as many employees and positions where, there's a lot of power concentrated in them?
Right. Well, I would offer that in terms of kind of outside financial interests, you are going to see in smaller boroughs, smaller townships, more of an overlap between those who are involved with the business community and those who are going to be serving in government. And there's a little island in Lake Erie, and I was talking with the Ohio State Ethics Commission, and there's this a little tiny island, and the people who run it, the guy who's in charge is also the guy who owns the snowplow company. So that's the only way they can get their streets plowed, is if they do business with each other. And there's ways in Pennsylvania, it's also under the State Ethics Act, it's not a violation to contract with your own governmental body, so long as you have all the proper disclosures. You need to make sure that it's public what the different bids were you really actually the lowest bidder of the snowplows in your community? And that's something that the public needs to know. And I feel like I didn't quite answer all the questions there. The statement of financial interest is something that's required of all public officials. It's actually part of what you have to file to be on the ballot as a candidate. It's supposed to be part of all nominees for our boards and commissions as well, to be filed 10 days before they're voted in, so that the people who are voting them in can actually see what their outside interests are. It's also required of all of our public employees, which is a defined term, and it includes lots of different areas, mostly those that have interactions with the public as opposed to like an internal, like the IT department, HR, and anyone who can make an economic impact on the interest of any person. So that's a lot of people are supposed to be filling this out. And on that form, you're supposed to disclose your ownership interests. If you're on the board of directors, it says the word business, but that's the courts have held that means any organization, any entity. So that would include, the United Way, even though they're not a for-profit entity. You would disclose like the interest rates on your loans, your secondary employment, like LL Bean, and other things like that nature. We also in Pittsburgh have something called the Statement of Affiliations, which is, as Rachel can say, is on open book, and anyone can look at the website and see. So there's one page right now that says who has an ownership interest in that contract. So who's on the board of directors if it's a nonprofit, who has more than, I think it's a 3% ownership share in the entity. So it's a long one for Amazon, but it's a great resource.
One quick follow-up question for you, Leanne. I just want to clarify for the audience, the statements of financial interests, those that apply just to state employees and state and officials who hold state. Correct.
It's enforced by the State Ethics Commission, but it goes to every single governmental body. Like a lot of governmental agencies, I don't know if they have as much staffing as they deserve. So maybe everybody doesn't know that they need to do this. And I think it was you, Jennifer, that said, I've never been told I have to do this. My predecessor didn't do this. So a lot of things take a culture shift. So there's, that's a form that's required for every public employee. And if you don't have a job description, you really you would be considered that, because your job description is what limits the authority of your position. So if you have no limits, you would be able to create an economic impact, and you should be filing that. So that's something that's a big area of enforcement for the State Ethics Commission. It's a $250 fine. It's something that needs to be filed every year. They can go back 5 years for their statute of limitations. And what would be nice, since they're a state entity, is if they could pull it from the state pay in order to enforce those fines, but state law doesn't say that yet. So.
And where can you find those forms, just very quickly, where can you find those forms if people in our audience want to view them?
So they are available at the head of government, whatever that government may be. So as we define a local government body, so within Pittsburgh, there's a lot of entities that are under the Municipal Authorities Act. So like our stadium authority, our parking authority, those are entities that could have them on site, or maybe they talk with Pittsburgh and say, can you do it for us? We're such a small office. But at our office, the seat of power is council. And so the clerk's office houses those. Anyone can walk in and request to see a copy of them. And that has to be, the law provides the timeframes of which that has to be provided. I think it's 2 days to 5 days, depending on how recently it was required. And that's the thing that really can be very crucial. It's kind of like how we didn't catch those mobsters on their crimes, but we got them for tax evasion, right? So this is the disclosure form. So if somebody has a backdoor dealing, they made a promise a couple years ago to get a job that they have now, we can look back at that form and say, did you show the promise of consideration at that time? Because if you had outside income of more than $1,300, it has to be reported. It doesn't matter if it's as a landlord, as a business, the promise of future employment. And so anyway, so and Pittsburgh, it's at the clerk's office. For state employees, you can look at the State Ethics Commission. That commission is kind enough to let everyone use their website to fill it out electronically, but you still need to have a local copy to be compliant with that, being able to produce it in time. So if it's some people, if they file it on the website, you can find it that way too.
Great, thank you.
And I would mention that those disclosure forms should squarely fall under the state's open records law coverage area. So I have attached in the chat for everyone to see kind of a basic guide that we have produced about how to request open records in Pennsylvania if you're unfamiliar with it. And Liam, very briefly, can you talk about the enforcement mechanism of the Ethics Act? Because I know in your work, part of your responsibility is to investigate complaints about potential violation of the Ethics Act.
Yeah, absolutely. So my office is tasked with some really great duties: advice, education, training, helping with these disclosures, because the disclosures are a very important part, as well as enforcement. Now, with every good governmental ethics agency that I've met with across the country, they really push advice. So there's good actors who want to do the right thing. And if we can help give them interpretations of how the law would apply to their specific facts, because as you can imagine, these laws that govern, that restrict government actors, that are written by legislators, sometimes there's holes, sometimes there's exceptions. Be a very tricky and complex area of the law. So I highly recommend anyone to get advice to avoid the need for an enforcement issue at the State Ethics Commission. Anyone who's a public employee, which is, again, is like pretty much everybody that holds a public job, can receive free legal advice from their attorneys about how those laws would apply to them. You can do the same thing in Pittsburgh. And so that's what a good sign that we're doing a good job is that we prevented the problem, right? That's the goal. But enforcement is always out there as well. Unfortunately, the courts have kind of narrowed down some of their findings on what's considered a substantive violation, and how they look at how cases are, the penalties are assessed. But on the other hand, it's remedial legislation, and so the courts are very broad in how they interpret that too. So I'm sorry, I hope I answered your question. There's more room. I wish that at the state law and other places in the home rule charter system that our governmental entities could assess greater fines and could pull those from your government paychecks as
You
opposed
did
to having to
answer.
get a sheriff to, sorry.
No, thank you for that. One of the surprising things that Angela and I discovered during the course of our reporting is that Suplizio, over the years, gave generous bonuses at the end of the year to city employees, which included himself. And having covered local and state government for many years between us, it seemed unusual. In fact, back in the 2000s, taxpayer-funded bonuses became the backbone of a major corruption scandal in the state legislature that came to be known as Bonusgate. So, Rachel, I want to ask you, is it normal or perhaps unusual but not unacceptable for local officials and employees to receive bonuses, keeping in mind that these are taxpayer dollars? And who has the power to decide how the money should be used?
I am not familiar with that happening ever in Pittsburgh. I mean, people do, obviously, job duties change and responsibilities can sometimes change, and their salary will change from year to year. I've prioritized just making sure that people are equitable. If two people are doing the same job, making sure that they're paid the same amount of money. Mechanically, I literally do not know how that would be possible in Pittsburgh, to just dish out cash as a one-time bonus. And I think part of that, and one of the questions sort of alluded to this, but the controller is elected independently. And I think when your check and balance is an appointment of either council or of a mayor, you lose some of that independent authority and that ability for an independent controller, an independently elected controller, to say, hey, wait, what's going on, right? Because they were appointed by the mayor and approved by council, right? So when I, as city controller in Pittsburgh, I report to the public, right? And I think that has really solidified this position historically, because it's not, I don't report to the mayor, so I have no interest in, if that effort was attempted in hiding it in any way, and I'm not accusing anyone of doing anything here like that, but that I think is a really good prevention method, is to make sure that whoever is watching your books isn't an appointed position. And oftentimes I think that that's restricted by just budgetary capacity in a lot of smaller municipalities. But that has worked quite well for us here.
And before we go to audience questions, I did just want to follow up briefly with you, Jennifer, on the bonuses. I mean, did people in DuBois have any idea that was happening?
Well, I'm sure there were people, yes, because it was basically most of the people that worked at City Hall got bonuses. So it had been, mentioned, but I don't think people really thought that it was the dollar amount. Maybe they thought they were $50 bonuses, but these were significant bonuses that were going out to multiple employees every year. And the sad thing is, in that sense, is our controller is elected.
Wow.
So yeah, he is elected. And he was just reelected. So there's still some facets to all of this that to me just don't add up, because you're seeing bonus checks, going with taxpayer money. But again, is that person not educated in the policy and procedure as to who is actually eligible for bonuses with taxpayer money? It's never really been clarified, maybe to him. So, and it was funny because, there was a list every year, just a handwritten note of what people were getting with, for bonuses. And it would happen year after year. So, but what's ironic is our controller was first appointed to his position. It was vacated and then he ran for re-election. So he is still in that position. But yeah, again, I go back to DuBois is the perfect storm.
Yeah, and it kind of just brings me to the question of, like, what can the public do to better arm itself, right? If you're a resident of not just of DuBois, but of any, local municipality, like, what can you do to recognize and prevent conflicts of interest in your local government? Because I think that's one of the things that Min and I kept hearing from a lot of people in DuBois, is that they sort of felt powerless in front of, this situation that they were dealing with. I mean, what other options are there aside from the ballot box on election day for, residents to make their voices heard and demand accountability?
I'll go ahead, Councilwoman.
Truly in DuBois, people were afraid to speak up. Like, there was a lot of cronyism in our town. It was an elite group of people that basically ran the community. And I would go to council meetings as a business owner and would walk out and be like, I don't understand how our city is being run, because nothing was public. Everything was behind the scenes. So one, the public needs to truly educate themselves as to how your municipality should be working and ask questions. I'm a question asker, as anyone knows now at council meetings, but you've got to educate yourself. We had council members that never looked at their packet of information, never saw a budget for the city. And they were council members for years. They just trusted that he was doing his job. But the public really needs to ask questions and get involved. Truly, this is for the future of everyone's area that they live in. You know, your future depends on you educating yourself and knowing, you know, what is right and what is wrong. And it's our legacy for our future to do this. I never thought I would be doing it, but we needed to step up, and thank God there were other people with me, and people started asking questions. And then Spotlight PA with their investigative journalism started, you know, right to nose, and that kept bringing more things to light for us.
Great. I am going to start. We're getting a lot of great audience questions. But before we get to them, we've gotten a few questions from people who have asked, like, what prompted state prosecutors to investigate. The only thing that we know is what we read in the initial state. There were some underlying documents in the initial state charges that basically said that they received an anonymous letter outlining what, you know, it was from concerned citizens, and these citizens were concerned about potential conflicts of interest that Herm Suplizio had in his position, both as city manager, but also as head of the nonprofit, the Local United Way. So I just wanted to address that before we started moving on. We have a question from Mary Jane, who asks, how can elected officials effectively perform their financial oversight responsibilities in a small city on a continuing basis? And I will open it up. I guess, Rachel, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. I think asking for monthly reports is a really great way to start. I think adopting, codifying the adoption of GASB accounting standards and an annual audited financial statement in the form of the annual comprehensive financial report. Those are two ways that a local, you know, if those two things aren't happening now, that's the first thing I would start with. And then I would start asking for monthly reports of check runs or cash sheets. I don't know how what the terminology is in the municipality where you live, but asking for those monthly transactions, and then making sure that everything is online. If DuBois produces an annual comprehensive financial report, I couldn't find it online today. And open accounting dictate that all of that information is online. So, you know, I think it's absolutely true that the resources that Pittsburgh has available to the public are not going to happen everywhere. I mean, they were big investments, both in terms of money and time, that the controller's office has made in the last decade. But getting things, just asking for those records and the transaction sheets, and adopting those standards and asking for that annual audited financial statement, or, you know, those are ways to start. And just becoming familiar with those documents. And my email is rachel.heisler@pittsburghpa.gov. If you want to talk about it, I am more than happy to. I just, you know, I think if these materials aren't presented to, let alone the public, but an elected official and on council or the mayor in a way that's digestible to them, there are people who will sit and walk you through what these documents say. And it doesn't have to be a peer on council. It can be, you know, an auditor in an accounting firm, or a peer, you know, council person in another community. But just getting access to that material, if it's not currently provided to you, is where I would start, and then adopting those standards.
We have received several questions from our audience members about the case against Mr. Suplizio, including from people who believe he hasn't committed wrongdoing and that he has done a lot of good things for DuBois. So I'm wondering, Angela, whether you can weigh in on this, and perhaps later, Jennifer, if you feel comfortable addressing what we still don't know about the case.
Well, yes, look, there's always a presumption of innocence, right? And I think what has really complicated matters here is that we have not heard anything from Herm Suplizio, not from him, not from his attorneys. And I think that puts us as journalists certainly in a very sort of difficult position in trying to provide, his side of the story. And even if he, as somebody who is now facing criminal charges, even if he didn't want to talk, it's pretty unusual that, that lawyers, his lawyers would not speak. So I think that has sort of hamstrung us in trying to really understand what his explanation might be for these things. And I know that there have been some people in the city, and Jennifer, please, feel free to take this and run, who have said that, there's no missing money. But again, I personally, as a journalist, don't feel like we have gotten a clear explanation as to what that means. All we've had is these blanket statements that say no money is missing.
True. I mean, yes, he is innocent until proven guilty, but as manager of the city, he has a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers. And now, as a councilwoman, I can see that there has been gross mismanagement of taxpayer funds. For me, that's the thing, is the gross mismanagement that we're seeing. It's a shame it has had to come to this. And we had a solicitor that would, even at every meeting, instead of where she works for the pleasure of council, she would defend him and his actions. And the fact that, we have a solicitor at one point that brought $93,000 worth of cash into the city building is just crazy, for the lack of another term. And it's just, there is gross mismanagement. We need fiscal responsibility in the city of DuBois. And I know on my behalf, I look at everything. We now get budgets. We get where we're at on our spending, monthly reports. Every 2 weeks, we get our checking accounts, auto draft. I look through all of it. I ask the interim manager what we're spending. I know my two fellow councilmen, Pat and Elliot, are the same way. We are asking a lot of questions. We were elected to do a job, and I'm going to do it to the best of my ability.
Thank you, Jennifer. And speaking of that, we have an interesting question from Neil, who asks, do solicitors have to file statutes under the ethics law? I think Neil is referring to the financial disclosure. And I want to ask Leanne this, because I know especially in some municipalities, the municipal solicitor could be a firm, or it could be an individual.
Yes, that's right. And there's a lot of case law on this issue. So I want to refrain from giving legal advice on this, because it's, as you can imagine, it's a litigated issue by the lawyers. They bring it up. So there's definitely some case law on that. And I'm happy to talk privately to whoever in regard to that, because as I said before, everything is very fact specific. Here in Pittsburgh, our solicitors do file their statement of financial interest, and so you could see that on our statement of financial interest. So for example, if we have the Citizens Police Review Board has a solicitor that advises them, and he files with the city clerk. So I could tell you that as for government solicitors. But the other thing that's important to know, just like you mentioned, that the firm could represent the same lawyer for different municipalities. There's a movement to replace some of these small governments with firms themselves. Like a corporate entity would be governing some of these small towns. So we really do need an update to our ethics law so that any kind of delegated duty is also covered under the act as well.
Right. We have a question about the city of DuBois paying Herm's legal bills. Jennifer, is it anticipated that Suplizio will be required to pay that back? And if you can also give us an update as to where that stands now in terms of his legal bills being covered by the city.
Well, I can say as of now, the city will not be paying any more of his legal bills. The city has paid for multiple people's legal bills besides just Herm. You know, it's handpicked attorneys that were, you know, just paid to represent him in Pittsburgh and locally. So we will not be paying any more bills for his legal defense at this point.
If I could ask a very quick follow-up question about that. So Jennifer, you and two other residents actually took city council to court last year to stop their kind of imminent decision to buy out Suplizio's contract. I'm very curious about, you know, what your reason was for doing that. What did it take? Because it's not often that we see members of the public go that far to stop an action of their local government that they believe is unreasonable or even unlawful.
Well, we were at the point that if they could have paid out Herm, it could have potentially bankrupted the city with his pension that he was due and his pay, which we did not have the financial means to pay. And at that point, the council that we had and the solicitor were adamant about paying him. And if at some point that the city does, you know, deem it we owe him the money, then we will pay it. But at this point, until the legal proceedings are finished, we're just not ready to do that. So we decided to file an injunction to halt that action.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Rachel, I wanted to ask you another quick question about local municipalities and helping them to become, you know, or smaller municipalities and helping them to become more transparent, like in terms of their finances, right? What can a place like DuBois do, knowing that there's probably limited funds for starting websites, for putting all of these things online? Is there any help that municipalities can get in order to get those things up and running?
Whether it's if you're implying that if there is direct financial assistance available to municipalities, I don't know. The one thing that people can request is the Auditor General is elected statewide, and they do this work and can investigate things across the state. So empowering that office to do work, you know, in places where there's concern of misconduct would be one place to start. Another, you know, for municipalities that have adopted GASB standards and are producing an annual audited financial statement, the other thing that you could a municipality can do is create a popular annual financial report. The acronym is PAFR, PAFR, excuse me. And ours are 14 pages. They're in color, they're heavy cardstock. But that's a snapshot of city finances, and it's based exclusively on your audited financial statements. So, creating that, it's we have 2 staff people that work with a firm that we pay, $15,000 to help design, because we just don't have that ability in-house. And it takes 6 weeks to do, and it's available to the public. It's very, very digestible. And we adopted an annual PAFR doing that about 10 years ago. And that has created a level of awareness with municipal finance across the city, with, local business, political, civic leaders, because we send it out and we distribute it as widely as we possibly can. So that's on a relative scale, actually a pretty inexpensive way, if you're already doing those other things, to just make your finances more digestible to the public. But the GFOA, which is Government Financial Officers Association, and GASB are both national or international on the GASB standards, that are available to municipalities if they're curious about learning more or adopting these. It is devoting resources to this it's not free. You need staff that can do this work, particularly with the segregation of duties that I've talked about, I think, at every opportunity this evening, because you do have to hire more staff. You do need to make sure that there are 2 different people doing these 2 tasks that, if intertwined, could lead you down a path that you don't want to be on as a municipality. So it is expensive, but as DuBois is learning that, there's a cost to not doing it, right? So making sure that, where you can segregate things with the staff that you do have, you do. And then, if budgets allow, expanding a controller's office or an independent auditor's office can be a really good way to just gain confidence from the public in the work that the municipality is doing.
Rachel,
could I interject real quickly?
Yeah,
I do
go
want
ahead.
to say that that is one thing that we are working diligently on, is getting everything online, now streaming our meetings live, which that was never anything available to the citizens. But getting everything out there, we truly want to give as much information to the public that we can get out there as much as possible. I just would like more people to ask questions, because I truly feel that's one of the biggest things, is educating yourself on your local government.
That's a great point. Thank you for that, Jennifer. We have an anonymous question about the Ethics Act. So I will ask this to you, Leanne. In a small Pennsylvania borough or township, if the manager or open records officer become aware that an official has failed to file their statement of financial interest or any other kind of required financial interest forms, are they required by the Ethics Act to report the lack of the required filing? So what are some responsibilities for public official themselves within the local government to uphold this responsibility?
Well, I would note that while it seems like it would be an employment requirement, it's not. This is something that's separate. It's a state law that overlaps. Just like filing your taxes, it's a personal responsibility. There's going to be no fine assessed to the borough. It's a personal fine. And again, the State Ethics Commission can go back 5 years, $250 a year for each missed filing. So that's $1,000 if they haven't been filing right there. So it's something that a person has to decide. Do I want to fill out this form every year before May 1st, or do I want to pay $250? And that's just a conversation for that person to have if they want to have some accountability and try to seek that. But again, it's not an employment issue. It doesn't have to do with your work. It's just has to do with your personal ethics. And I just wanted to piggyback on Jennifer's comment before about education and how important that is, and critical thinking and being able to question government. And as a society, like, where can we value that? How early can we be putting that as, should that be in our schools? Should we have some more civics classes? Uh, you know,
Yeah.
just a thought. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and that actually kind of brings me to something, I think it was you, Rachel, who mentioned it earlier. Is there anything from the state government level legislation that could be passed to require local municipalities to be more financially, transparent, or, even ethically transparent? You both mentioned that, there are some municipalities, the larger ones, that have sort of stronger, ethics and disclosure requirements. So I'm wondering, in terms of, if you could tell the state legislature you can pass one bill that will make things better, what would that be?
I actually think that mine has less to do with just the financial side of things and more to do with the ethics side of things, and either strengthening or altering or modifying. I don't know what the right word is, but the State Ethics Act, and just in providing it with adequate financial resources to fully staff the office. You know, I have the privilege of working in city government with Leanne, but Leanne has, I think, 1.5 staff people, which is more than most municipalities have in terms of ethics oversight. So making sure that there are state offices that, maybe DuBois didn't need someone full time, but it probably would have helped if they had someone in state government that they could call, or that was, acting like Leanne acts with the city of Pittsburgh, to make sure people are filing SOFIs, and to make sure that people are in compliance with ethics laws. Creating that kind of culture, I think, would be really beneficial to municipalities across the Commonwealth.
Great.
And I think Leanne has also you mentioned that there's some call to action that you would like to share. So I'll throw this to you first, but I'm curious to hear from all of our panelists. What are some things that we can all collectively do, either from the perspective of local government, either from the perspective of an elected official, from the perspective of being a part of the general public? What are some things that we can do to restore public trust, especially in the case of DuBois, following such a devastating kind of scandal? How can we restore the trust in government again?
I mean, that's tough, especially in the culture today where we have a lot of misinformation. That's really tough. Restoring lost public trust, that's really hard. I mean, we talked about transparency, disclosures, education. Those are all things that you can do, but if you're starting from the belief that it's not possible, it's really hard. I mean, what we need are people that are engaged, that people will volunteer, that they'll either educate themselves or advocate for the schools to have this sort of basic public education, so people know what to expect of their elected leaders. And once we kind of have some of that fundamental understandings of basic accountability and what we should be expecting, we can hold those people accountable in that way. But yeah, I mean, government is subservient to the people. We need people to be engaged and active in order to have a good government. So we need people with grit. I understand Councilperson Jackson has a flower shop, so you've dealt with those thorns all these years. So you're in a good position to fight some of these tough battles. So there's not an easy answer for that. In terms of my calls to action, I have a little list here. I've already covered schools, supporting journalists, That's just our investigative journalists. That's so crucial to, so crucial. And taking advantage of the free ethics advice that is available to all public servants within the state of Pennsylvania, whether you're at the municipal, borough, or state level. You can just call the State Ethics Commission. One of the really cool things, this is my other call to action, is under the State Ethics Act. Unlike basically every single other law in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where the state retains the power to legislate, under the Ethics Act, there's a provision that allows local municipalities or other local entities to supplement, to go beyond what's in the State Ethics Act. So it's a really cool way that you can, and you don't need any money to do that. You just need to, I don't know, you can call me, I'll help you write, help you write it out. It's important, and it can be staffed with volunteers. And that's something that's just really low hanging fruit. It's a great opportunity for any elected official to go out on a limb and say, this is what is right, and this is what we stand for. At the Allegheny County, we have it's called the ACE, the Allegheny County Ethics Commission, I think. And they could be expanded too. They could be giving advice as well. So there's a lot of areas of improvement that that are available here. Yeah. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for
Yeah.
all those suggestions. Jennifer, would you like to weigh in on this question about restoring trust?
Yes. I mean, that was one of the biggest things. Myself and the two other councilmen ran our campaign on, was restoring trust. Mr. Suplizio comes from a good family with a long line of history in the city of DuBois. And it just seems that sometimes now in politics a lot, that things just start to go awry. And it seems anymore that politics used to be you were doing it for the good of the community, and now people look at doing it for what's in it for me. And I get asked that a lot, and I truly just ran to do better for the community that I grew up in. I would like to see more people, step up. I don't have a vendetta against anyone. I just want to see better for our community. I'd like to see more people step up and get involved in your community, learn about, how things work. And there is a lot of miscommunication within the different forms of government in our community, and it's divided our town. And I'd like to see us somehow get that back together, where we can all work together and build that trust amongst everyone, because it's been a hard year for the city of DuBois in a lot of ways. But I think it's getting the education out to the people and learn how it happened, why it happened, and how we can fix that for the future.
Thank you. And Rachel, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
I just would say I have the pleasure of working with Leanne on a pretty regular basis with city government, but I want to commend Councilperson Jackson, and I think restoring faith in government, a good way to do that is to run for office. And I think in the environment that you found yourself in last year, it was surely challenging, and the dynamic in DuBois is probably not an easy place to do that if the community is still divided. And I think that's just remarkably noble. And I'm glad that we got to do this, and I'm glad I got to meet you. And that, I think, is a really good way to restore trust, is to put your name on a ballot if you think something's going wrong, and raise those issues.
And
I
that's
come from a great community, and I want to thank you for this. And DuBois is going to come out of this on top. It's a process, but there's a lot of great people in this community.
Thank you, everyone. And that's all the time that we have this evening. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us tonight and for all of you in our audience who spend this Thursday evening with us. We appreciate the support for our work at Spotlight PA. You can read our journalism online at spotlightpa.org. Thanks again and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.